The sterile hum of the Climnian medical bay was almost soothing, if not for the palpable tension crackling in the air. Pulsing lights adorned the walls, blinking in alien patterns designed to calm patients of every physiology. The doctors, a group of shimmering, translucent beings, hovered over the critical case on the central table. Their forms rippled like gelatin under an invisible breeze, shifting between hues of pale blue and deep green, a sign of deep concern. "He is beyond salvation," one of them declared in a voice that seemed to radiate directly into the minds of everyone present. Its nameplate, embossed with symbols humans could never pronounce, translated loosely to Chief Medic Urvik. Dr. Eli Carter stood off to the side, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. The translation implant in his temple had sputtered out halfway through the emergency procedures typical. He tapped the device, muttering under his breath, "Not now, you piece of junk." The patient was a Lyradonian dignitary, a crucial diplomat en route to a galactic summit. His species' biology was a marvel of layered exoskeletons and a circulatory system that resembled a lattice of glowing rivers, but even that couldn't withstand the catastrophic effects of a hyperspace engine meltdown. The Lyradonian had been dragged out of his ship's wreckage mere hours ago, his shimmering frame flickering like a failing light bulb. Urvik's tone grew sharper, or at least it seemed so from the rapid shifts in its luminescence. The alien medics clustered closer, their attention shifting away from Eli. He didn't need a translator to guess what was happening. They were giving up. Eli adjusted his stance and cleared his throat, speaking louder than necessary to grab their attention. "What's going on? What's the prognosis?" Chief Medic Urvik turned its semi-liquid head toward him, its luminous gaze filled with what could only be described as pity. The alien finally deigned to use its translator. "Human, your presence is unrequired. The patient is experiencing catastrophic organ failure. His neural pathways are collapsing. There is no corrective course." "No corrective course," Eli barked. His voice echoed in the chamber, drawing surprised glances from the other medics. "You're just going to let him die?" The aliens exchanged glances, or at least the strange flicker pulses that passed for their body language. "He has minutes left," Urvik stated. "Our medical database contains no treatment for injuries of this magnitude. His end is inevitable." Eli's jaw tightened. He stepped closer to the operating table, ignoring the slight shimmer of biofields meant to keep bystanders away. "Hold on. You're saying you've got all this fancy tech more advanced than anything we've got back on Earth and you can't do a thing? Not even try." "Our methods prioritize efficiency and statistical certainty," Urvik replied. "Attempting to prolong his life would only compound his suffering. This is a kindness." "A kindness, my ass," Eli muttered. His eyes darted to the diplomat's shattered exoskeleton, the faint glow of his life force dimming with every passing second. Despite the alien physiology, Eli could see something familiar, a being fighting to hang on. His fingers flexed at his sides, an old habit when he was thinking fast. "All right," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Urvik's translucent frame shifted, a sign of confusion. "Human, you lack the qualifications too." "I'm a trauma surgeon," Eli interrupted. "So forgive me if I don't just stand here and let a patient die on the table." Before anyone could stop him, Eli strode to the table, leaning over the alien diplomat's flickering form. He scanned the bizarre lattice of organic components, his mind racing. The injuries were horrific, but something about them reminded him of patching up a vascular rupture during an emergency surgery back on Titan's outpost hospital. "All right, buddy," he said to the unconscious alien. "I don't know if you can hear me, but you're not checking out today." He reached for the medical scanner at his waist, flipping it open with a practiced motion. The alien medics recoiled, their bodies pulsing in alarm. "What are you doing?" Urvik demanded. "Practicing medicine," Eli shot back. He bent over the patient, his fingers moving with the steady confidence of a man who had spent years making split-second decisions in high-stakes situations. The Lyradonian's circulatory system was hemorrhaging, except it wasn't blood he needed to stop. It was the bioelectric flow through the lattice. His eyes darted around the room, searching for something he could use. "Your cauterization tools, do they work on bioelectric channels?" he asked. Urvik hesitated. "They are not designed for." "Give me one," Eli ordered. A medic, perhaps too stunned to argue, handed him a sleek instrument that pulsed with an eerie blue light. Eli activated it, adjusting the settings instinctively. "All right, let's see if this works." He pressed the tool to a fractured segment of the Lyridonian's exoskeleton, sealing a jagged rupture. The flickering glow of the diplomat's circulatory system responded erratically, but then steadied. The medic's protests grew louder, but Eli ignored them. His hands worked quickly, replicating the process across the worst of the fractures. He reached into his medical pack for a bundle of synthetic microfibers, threading them into a shattered section of the lattice. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "Unacceptable," Ervik exclaimed, its tone a mix of horror and outrage. "This is not medical science. It is barbarism." "Funny," Eli grunted, "because it's working." The room fell silent, except for the hum of Eli's tools. Finally, he leaned back, his breath coming in sharp gasps. The diplomat's glow was steadier now, his breathing rhythmic. Eli turned to face the stunned medics. "Your turn. I've bought you time. Now, do your jobs." Ervik hesitated before gesturing for the other medics to approach. For the first time, there was no argument. They resumed their work, this time incorporating Eli's makeshift repairs into their advanced procedures. Eli stepped back, his legs threatening to give out from the adrenaline crash. He watched as the alien team worked to save their patient, a small, tired smile tugging at his lips. "Not on my watch," he murmured again. The silence in the Klimnian medical bay had shifted. Gone was the grim finality that had lingered in the air. In its place was something more uncertain, more hesitant, like the moment before a storm breaks. Ervik glanced at Eli, its luminescence unreadable. "This was reckless," the chief medic finally said. Eli wiped a hand down his face. "You're welcome." Ervik's glow flickered irritation, maybe. But beneath that, something else. "Human," the alien finally said, "you were not as predictable as I expected." Eli smirked. "Yeah, I get that a lot." The Klimnian medical bay, once filled with resigned finality, now buzzed with urgent purpose. The alien medics worked with renewed focus, their translucent hands moving in concert as they built upon the makeshift stabilization Eli had implemented. Eli stepped back, exhaling sharply. His muscles ached from tension, but he wasn't about to stop now. He scrubbed a hand over his face, smearing sweat and whatever alien residue had splattered onto his gloves. The Lyridonian diplomat was alive, but his vitals were still unstable. This wasn't over yet. Chief Medic Ervik hovered near the surgical display, its gelatinous form pulsing in deep contemplation. It flicked through a series of hollow symbols, studying the diplomat's condition. The patient's vital networks remained compromised, Ervik admitted, though its tone suggested it disliked the truth. Eli peered at the data, his mind shifting gears. He was used to reading human medical scans, but alien physiology had its own logic. The circulatory lattice was holding for now, but something was off. His outputs dropping, Eli muttered. "The auxiliary pathways you repaired are maintaining stability," one of the other medics noted, "but the systemic function is degrading." Eli frowned. The diplomat's bioelectric lattice, his version of a vascular system, wasn't just about circulation. It was an active network, channeling neural and metabolic energy throughout his body. Patching the structural damage wasn't enough if the system wasn't conducting properly. His organs would fail one by one. "We need to reinforce conductivity," Eli said. He turned to Ervik. "You have nerve regeneration stimulants." Ervik pulsed in irritation. "Lyridonians do not regenerate as humans do. Our methods involve cellular reconstruction, not simple nerve regrowth." Eli chewed his lip. "All right. Then we bypass the damage entirely." The alien medics glanced at each other. "Explain," Ervik demanded. Eli pointed at the surgical display. "Your regeneration methods are taking too long. His bioelectric network is failing faster than you can repair it. But if we create an external conduction bridge, something to reroute the impulses until his body has time to heal, we can keep his systems from shutting down." The room fell silent. "That is." One of the younger medics hesitated. "That is theoretically possible." Ervik's glow darkened. "And if we fail?" "We already know what happens if we do nothing," Eli countered. A long pause. Then Ervik exhaled in a slow, shimmering pulse. Prepare the neural interface. Eli nodded sharply. Good. We'll need a stable conductive medium, something biocompatible. Another medic gestured toward a storage unit. We have adaptive nanofilaments used for synaptic reinforcement in trauma cases. Eli's eyebrows shot up. That'll work. Load them into a microvascular scaffold and integrate them with his existing pathways. Ervik's luminous gaze fixed on him. You speak as if you have performed this procedure before. Eli huffed a dry laugh. I've improvised something similar on a patient with a crushed spinal column. This is just higher stakes. The surgical platform adjusted, its delicate robotic arms unfolding with eerie precision. A cluster of thin, silvery filaments extended toward the diplomat's fractured circulatory lattice. The medics worked quickly, threading the nanofilaments into the damaged regions. Eli kept his eyes on the surgical monitor, watching the diplomat's vitals fluctuate. His pulse was erratic. The neural conduction lag was still too high. Damn it, Eli muttered. It's not syncing. The bioelectric frequencies are misaligned, one of the medics noted. Eli nodded. His body isn't recognizing the artificial pathways. We need to mimic his natural impulses. Ervik's glow flickered with skepticism. You suggest replicating his neural patterns. Yes, Eli turned to the display. You've got a record of his baseline neural activity, right? Feed that into the scaffolding. Use it as a template to trigger natural integration. A flicker of hesitation. Then Ervik pulsed in acknowledgement. Implementing now. The surgical system adjusted, transmitting a carefully calibrated pulse into the diplomat's new conductive pathways. The filaments hummed softly as they synced with his body. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the diplomat's glow steadied. His flickering neural output smoothed into a steady rhythm. Eli let out a slow breath. The bypass is holding, one of the medics confirmed. Ervik regarded the monitor in stunned silence. The chief medic hesitated. This should not have worked. Eli smirked. And yet, here we are. The room remained quiet for a long moment as the medics took in what had just happened. Then, finally, Ervik spoke. The patient is stable. Eli leaned against the nearest console, exhaustion pressing down on him. Good, he muttered. Now let's keep him that way. The Klimian medical bay had settled into a tense but controlled rhythm. The Lyridonian diplomat lay motionless under the soft glow of a containment field, his vitals no longer in freefall. The bypass held. His neural lattice was stable, but he wasn't improving. Eli Carter frowned as he studied the readings. His makeshift fix had worked technically. The diplomat's body was maintaining function, but there were no signs of regenerative activity, no cellular repair, no metabolic recovery, just stasis. He turned to Ervik. All right, he's alive. Now why isn't he healing? The chief medic's luminescent form pulsed in contemplation. Lyridonian physiology requires full cellular synchronization for regeneration to initiate. Your intervention has preserved his function, but his body does not recognize itself as whole. Eli narrowed his eyes. So he's not rejecting the repairs, but he's also not integrating them. Correct? Eli exhaled through his nose. He'd seen something like this before, patients who had survived catastrophic injuries but remained in a kind of metabolic limbo. In humans, that often meant severe shock or a failure of the autonomic response. The body needed to be coaxed into recovery. He tapped his fingers against his arm. Okay, if his system isn't triggering healing on its own, we have to do it manually. One of the younger medics shifted uneasily. There is no known method to force Lyridonian regeneration. Eli tilted his head. How does it normally work? The medic hesitated. When Lyridonian cells experience injury, they rely on systemic bioelectric feedback to initiate reconstruction. Eli's brain latched onto that. You mean the cells don't repair unless they detect the right bioelectric signals? Yes, Ervik confirmed. The lattice serves as a regulatory network. If it does not recognize the system as whole, it does not activate recovery. Eli clenched his jaw. So we need to convince his body that he's whole again. Ervik's glow darkened in skepticism. That is not how cellular repair functions. Eli shot him a dry look. Yeah? And yet here we are. The chief medic's flickering pulse suggested frustration, but it didn't argue. Eli turned back to the diplomat. The bioelectric lattice was functioning, but it was passive, dormant. It wasn't sending the necessary signals to trigger healing. He needed to jumpstart it. He scrubbed a hand down his face, thinking. Then his gaze flicked to the surgical equipment. Can you isolate his neural signal, he asked. Ervik hesitated. For what purpose? I want to replicate it, Eli said. If his body won't start healing because it doesn't recognize itself as functional, we need to trick it into thinking it is. The room went quiet. You are suggesting neural signal induction, one of the medics said slowly. That is highly untested. Eli spread his hands. So was everything else we just did. Ervik's glow pulsed erratically. If the frequency is incorrect, it could cause systemic failure. Eli nodded. That's why we don't guess. We map his existing neural patterns, extract the baseline signal, and reintroduce it at a controlled amplitude. It's no different from stimulating neural pathways in a comatose patient. The chief medic was silent for a long moment. Then, begin the mapping process. The medics moved swiftly, activating an array of delicate scanners that descended from the ceiling. Threads of light spread over the diplomat's body, tracing his internal pathways, mapping every pulse and fluctuation of energy. Eli watched as the data compiled on the surgical display. The diplomat's neural activity was faint, barely registering beyond basic autonomic function. He wasn't brain dead, but his body had gone into an extreme conservation state. We need to amplify the signal, Eli said. Just enough to stimulate activity. One of the medics adjusted the controls, preparing localized induction. A soft hum filled the air as the first pulse was delivered. The diplomat's readings flickered, his glow brightened just a fraction. Response detected, a medic noted. Eli clenched his fists. Again, increased by 5%. Another pulse. This time, the diplomat's fingers twitched. His chest rose slightly deeper. Eli's heart pounded. That's it. Keep going. Ervik's form flickered between hues, the Klimnian equivalent of wariness. If we overstimulate. I know, Eli said. Keep it incremental. Another pulse. The diplomat's glow steadied. His vitals ticked upward. Cellular markers previously stagnant began showing metabolic activity. Eli exhaled sharply. We're getting somewhere. Ervik studied the readings. Regenerative processes are initializing. A murmur passed through the medics. Some looked impressed. Eli allowed himself a tired smile. Now we let his body do the rest. Hours passed. The medical bay, once a frantic hive of activity, had settled into a low, watchful hum. The Laridonian diplomat remained unconscious, but his vitals had steadied. His bioelectric lattice no longer flickered erratically. Instead, the previously failing pathways pulsed in a rhythmic pattern, like a heart finding its beat again. Eli Carter sat on a low stool beside the surgical platform, elbows on his knees, watching the monitors with the detached exhaustion of someone too tired to rest. The medical team had continued to refine the signal induction, carefully modulating the diplomat's bioelectric activity to reinforce cellular healing. So far, it was working. Now, it was just a waiting game. Chief Medic Ervik stood nearby, its translucent form flickering between deep blue and pale green contemplation, if Eli had learned to read it right. The patient's regenerative response is progressing, Ervik stated. Eli smirked. That's alien, for he's getting better, right? The chief medic exhaled a slow pulse. It is an unexpected outcome. Eli leaned back slightly. Unexpected, or just inconvenient for your protocols. Ervik's glow darkened in irritation. Laridonian medicine does not account for it, hesitated. Your approach. Eli raised an eyebrow. Meaning? The alien studied the vitals display for a long moment before answering. You do not treat certainty as finality. Your methods resist statistical inevitability. Eli snorted. Yeah, well, if I gave up every time a case looked impossible, I wouldn't be much of a doctor. Ervik's pulsing form shifted in a way Eli had learned to recognize as thoughtfulness. Your species prioritizes persistence over probability. Eli shrugged. Sometimes that's what saves a life. A soft chime interrupted them. One of the monitors displayed a new set of readings, gradual but measurable improvement in neural coherence. He's stabilizing autonomic function, a younger medic reported. Cellular synchronization is holding. Eli stood, stretching out the stiffness in his shoulders. So what's next? The patient will regain consciousness within 1 planetary cycle, Ervik said. Assuming no further complications. Eli exhaled. Good. There was a long silence before Ervik spoke again. You are. Not like other medical practitioners we have encountered. Eli chuckled. I'll take that as a compliment. The chief medic regarded him for a moment longer, then pulsed a quiet acknowledgement. This case will be studied. Eli grinned. Just make sure you add a section about reckless human improvisation. Ervik's glow flickered just for a moment before it turned back to the patient. The Lyradonian diplomat remained still, but his glow was strong, his breath steady. Eli Carter had saved him. Not on my watch, he thought. And with that, he stepped back, leaving the alien medics to their work, knowing that, for better or worse, they would never look at human medicine the same way again.